Hey guys, here we are with another not so mini vlog. I think my shortest one was 12 minutes so far. So yeah, this would be mini vlog number 29 in the countdown, counting down towards 1 from 31. This one I'm calling Bouncing Off of Fake Geeks. And it's definitely going to be a ramble. I don't think I quite have a grasp on the point I want to make or points that I want to make. I'm just some ideas bouncing off of, or bouncing out of my mind that came out of the discussion maybe almost a month past now of fake geeks amongst the community, which in my awareness started with Howler Mouse doing a video on Fake Geeks, which he later took down, and I feel he was going after some complicated and assorted ideas and ended up being taken as kind of a straw man, if you know the debating term of a straw man, something you can knock down easily. You set up a straw man and then you knock him down to win your argument. So I think he was taken wrong by some people, or perhaps some people were responding not even knowing what he'd originally said in some cases. Because I think, although I totally agree with the people who say, it's you don't own it, anybody can take geek culture and do whatever they want with it and have whatever feelings they have about it, and their experience is as valid as anyone else. That's totally true, but I think that there's also interesting things that have happened, and as you've been involved in science fiction and comic books and other things that are now called geek culture over the years, it's kind of weird to see the changes that have happened and the different directions things have taken. And in a way that's true of all of life as you get older, seeing the way things evolve, words take on new meanings, everything seems to take on new meanings, and everybody comes in at their own different point, and everything has a different meaning for them. And so there's this weird, sometimes a weird generational things, or just between individuals, what things mean. And it's interesting, and it's interesting to see, which I think was one of the things Howler Mouse was talking about, but see people try to become celebrities by sort of wearing the cloak of geek culture. So maybe calling what they do being about comic books when it's not really that much about comic books. And the biggest example of that is what the San Diego Comic Book Convention has become. Yes, there is a comic book portion to it, but there's all kinds of other cultural groups that cloak themselves in the word comic book for whatever reason, and and to us who really know a lot about comic books, they don't seem to be about comic books at all. But maybe in their mind they are about comic books, or comic books have just become a catchphrase for something more. I don't really know. About a year ago, I think I mentioned my nephews and nieces. I'd given them graphic novels, and they were all excited, and they were talking about movies about Batman and the Avengers. I think the Avengers had just come out, and I'd given them some of them Avengers comic books, and they were shocked when I told them about buying comic books, current day comic books, at the comic book store. I assumed everyone understood comic books were still ongoing, but they were sure comic books were just something that happened in the past, and now they were movies and TV shows and videos and stuff, and collections of old comic books that uncles give to them. Like I was giving them the Kree Skull War and Avengers Forever. So to them, it had a totally different meaning. People, even amongst people who have quite a bit of experience with the comic books, everyone comes in on a different level. Like, say with Batman, I guess my first experience with Batman must have been reruns of the Adam West Batman. And then next I got a book, a hardcover book that reprinted Batman from the 40s to the 70s, and so then I got that kind of Batman, I believe. Anyway, that's my memory of it. But someone else may have come in with the Warner Brothers. It was Warner Brothers, I think. Anyway, the Bruce Timm kind of cartoons. Other people may be coming in now with Beware the Bat, or with, who knows what. That's just one example. And it's kind of weird to watch things that you had as kind of your small cultural niche become larger. A very weird thing to me is when I was in college, the Ramones were my sort of secret tribal group. I mean, you'd go to a Ramones concert and there'd be at the most 1,000 people there, and you felt like you were all kind of Ramones people. You were punk rockers, and you were part of this secret tribe almost. Only a few people knew what Gabba Gabba Hey meant. But now I go to pizzerias with my family, and they're playing Ramones on the speakers. In fact, the Ramones are lighter fare than a lot of what they're playing. They're playing kind of post Black Sabbath heavy metal on those restaurants sometimes too. And so that's kind of an odd sensation. I had a friend who, when his son was 4, I went over to their house, and he was listening to the Ramones all the time. At 4 years old, the Ramones was his favorite band. But to me, they were this underground thing. That's taken some adjusting. I'm old enough to remember, as you're probably now going to gather, a time before Star Wars, when all of this stuff, science fiction and comic books, it was so much there in Star Wars, but after Star Wars it became a thing all over the place in our culture. Before that, it seemed to me, as like a 12, 13, 10-year-old boy, a secret kind of culture that no one knew about. So that changed there. It blew up with Star Wars, and it's been going on ever since, from my perspective. Someone else older than me might have seen it blow up before Star Wars. To me, Star Wars is kind of this cutoff point. And words keep changing. I don't remember when the word geek came in. I feel like it came in with the computer billionaire explosion, that these were the geek billionaires, and that's when that term really fixed in society. And now we talk about geek culture, and we include comic books and science fiction and stuff, but I feel like it came in with computers, and it was because everyone knows that people who like computers like all those other things. They like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. Earlier on, I remember thinking of it as nerd stuff. And I remember in the 90s, at least here in Portland, at some point in the 90s, suddenly noticing like the girls working at the cafes and stuff were very nerdy looking. And I thought, wow, I'd like to date some of these girls, pretty looking nerd girls. But I soon realized that I hadn't noticed this cultural shift where, at least in this area, looking nerdy was actually being hip and attractive. And now I see it like, what's it called? Nerd Locker. And those guys on Nerd Locker are kind of hip nerds to some extent. And so anyway, there's a whole kind of hip nerd thing, and that's just weird to me, because I'm not used to it. And there probably are some people out there that, I wouldn't want to watch, because to me they would seem too fake. And maybe to other people they aren't, so I'm not attacking anybody. And it is unfortunate when people lose sight of things and do have the urge to be critical of newer people in an area. But on the other hand, it is fair to, over time, to have feelings about things and responses to things, and such. An area outside of comic books that I was very involved in up till about 10 years ago was the world of science fiction writers and science fiction wannabe writers, which kind of intersects with science fiction fandom. I don't know how many people realize, but the comic book convention was kind of an outgrowth of the science fiction convention, and at least last I knew about it, there was a science fiction convention every week somewhere in the country, and often many, every weekend somewhere in the country, and often many on the same weekend. And there's a whole culture, or was a whole culture, I mean I haven't kept track of it, of people whose big part of their lives was going to science fiction conventions. And at some point, and this started as being all about written science fiction. You know, it started back in I want to guess 37, 36, they had the first World Science Fiction Convention, which was about 50 people or something, or even less, in a hotel lobby somewhere. And many of the people at that first convention went on to become famous science fiction writers, like Isaac Asimov and Frederick Pohl, and the like. And I think their first guest of honor was Robert Heinlein. But that grew out of people who wrote in letters to science fiction magazines. Anyway, out of that fandom grew the comic book fandom. But that fandom eventually became more about itself and less about the writers and the people. Most of the people at first were still people who read science fiction, but eventually it absorbed all these different threads, and there'd be people who go to science fiction conventions for the filking, the songs with lyrics changed to be about science fiction themes, and people who went for the costuming. They didn't call it cosplay back when I was involved, and people who went just for the gaming, and then there started being anime tracks and various tracks, and soon the conventions got fairly large, still nothing compared to San Diego Comic Convention. And then people started having like ReaderCon, conventions that were just for people who are about written science fiction, to sort of separate it out. And then there was a whole language, there's all these names that the science fiction community had for things that sort of separated us from them. And I can't even remember those names anymore, because I never was fully part of the fandom part of these conventions. Other than filking, which is their version of doing music that's about science fiction. But one thing that was really big throughout science fiction, the hardcore readers and the writers and the fans, was you do not call it sci-fi. And sci-fi was the sign of the barbarians. Sci-fi was people who, it meant if you call it sci-fi that you didn't understand how intelligent it was, and that you were assuming it was dumb and putting it down. And eventually I assume people have let go of that, because everybody says sci-fi. People who love it say sci-fi. It's not a derogatory term. But it just sort of reminds me of this fake geek. If you were to say sci-fi, then you were a fake science fiction person. You didn't get it. But these things just change. Everything changes and moves on. And another thing that might have some parallels possibly in comic books and the way people feel kind of weird about it is in science fiction. It was throughout most of the 70s and even into the early 80s still dominated by written science fiction. And it slowly started to shift after Star Wars came out. At first, to the people who love science fiction, Star Wars seemed great. It brought more people in. There was more interest in science fiction books, more science fiction books published, and of course many more science fiction movies and TV shows. But after a while, the books started selling less and less. So back in the 70s, although most science fiction writers maybe didn't make that much, there were some who made it to the bestseller list, like Philip Jose Farmer and Arthur C. Clarke, of course, and Isaac Asimov, and people like that who weren't that stodgy old guys yet. Just sort of hardworking science fiction writers who started making it. But now there aren't science fiction writers on bestseller lists, and the world of written science fiction shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, even while all the top 10 movies up until this wave of comic book movies, all the top movies were science fiction. So people assumed if you were writing science fiction, you were rich, but you weren't. You were getting poorer and poorer and poorer as science fiction itself was becoming a bigger and bigger part of the culture. And if you were into the recent written science fiction, no one would know what you're talking about. They would only know about Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek or whatever. So, comic book fans may be going through a bit of that now, where comic books actually have a smaller audience, and yet the basics of the comic book, the American superhero comic book world, are more and more well known as there are these blockbuster movies and all that kind of thing. So I would argue, I bet there's more people reading comics than we think, but that's for another vlog. This is really tangential, although maybe it relates to the Ramones. But I was thinking about how the meaning of things changes so much through the song My Sharona by the Knack. And the only reason this came to me was 2 days ago, I think. I was in the car, and for a few minutes I had National Public Radio on instead of the podcasts I usually listen to. And they were interviewing an author, I don't even know what book, and the book took place in the summer of 1979. And she said she listened to the song My Sharona 250 times while she was writing the book. And after that I went back and I started listening or watching My Sharona, different versions of it, on YouTube. And a number of those versions were by the group The Knack. And there's a whole sort of short documentary on the song My Sharona, which is interesting. But through a bunch of videos, I saw the Knack doing this one song, which was their monster hit and eclipsed anything else they ever did, doing this song over and over again at different times in their lives. And you could see the very first time they did My Sharona, they were young and like full of all the sort of sexual angst and energy and pent-up rage or whatever, pent-up something that is part of that My Sharona song. And then you could see a few years later they're kind of doing a more tired version of it, and it just doesn't have that oomph, and you can tell they're sick of doing this song, and they're like, oh my god, am I going to have to do this song for the rest of my life, and does this song define my life? And then probably in the mid-2000s, before two of their members died, they're in their 50s, and they're on a huge stage at a big outdoor festival in Japan, and the whole audience of probably 100,000 people or 50,000 people is on their feet in front of them. And here they are, these old guys, and they're playing their hearts out for this song, My Sharona, that is the only song that defines them. And instead of it being this trap, it's like this liberating thing that, you know, yes, this is what our whole lives is about, but isn't this so cool? And here we are doing it, and it's incredible. It's like the song changes its meaning as it goes through their lives, as songs change their meaning as they go through my life. And My Sharona itself, when I heard it in 1979, I thought of it as the big changing of the guard, because I was into, I had just gotten into the new wave and punk, and then suddenly My Sharona hit, and it was a giant hit, and it broke open and changed the way radio was programmed. And at the time, music seemed really important to me, and you had to align yourself with kinds of music for what kind of person you are. And anyway, it was a big, exciting moment for me at the time, and it seemed to symbolize all the changes I was going through, and I was about to go off to college and all of that. But then very quickly it meant something else, because during my freshman year of college, it was the song you heard endlessly played by bad cover bands at frat parties. And so it became the frat party song to me. And I went to a lot of frat parties and drank a lot of really bad beer amongst large groups of drunk people. And so that it became that song to me. And now, then I forgot about it. And now it's become this sort of symbolic song of how you go through life and how things change. And they go down and then they go up. and you find new meaning in things. I've been finding new meaning in comic books before I started YouTube, but then it's really gone up. The sense of my connection to comic books with all these videos I've done and all the videos I've watched and all the thinking I've done about it. So anyway, yeah, somehow I got there from geek culture, and this mini vlog is as long as any of my sleepy vlogs. So who am I kidding? This is just a sleepy vlog countdown. But I guess each vlog is dedicated to just one subject. That can be mini or maxi. I hope you guys are all doing well. Oh, and I want to apologize. You may notice some of these videos, and probably because I'm waving my hands now, they kind of fluctuate in and out. And it's because I'm uploading them on my iPad with YouTube's own uploader app. Because it's the quickest and easiest way for me to upload things. It's way, way quicker than any other way. But it seems to have built into it this option that you normally are offered on YouTube to fix motion problems, because they think they're sensing motion. But this is really a still backdrop. So when they think they're sensing motion, they actually shift the backdrop around in it. But I'm going to continue to do a lot of videos this way just because it's so easy. If anyone finds it really sickening, let me know, and maybe I'll think about finding other ways. Anyway, talk to you all later. Bye-bye.